Men are not taught to look at what they were missing as a child. Imagine yourself between the ages of 3 to 7, the youngest you can imagine yourself, what you were like. I'm talking before society came in. You're probably like this free-spirited child. Maybe you wanted to be a superhero, or you loved to play with cars, and you're told you weren't allowed to do that. Imagine that playful portion of yourself. You had no boundaries to what you could do in your life. You are free-spirited. That's the inner child inside of you. You're never too old to start healing. I don't care if you're 99 years old, you decide to wake up one day and like, okay, I'm tired of living like this. Even if you have one day to live, start that journey.
Welcome to the Derelict Podcast. For the disparaged, depleted, and delinquent souls trying to find our way, we're talking about the scary part of the journey, where we don't know how it'll end. Let's be free to face our fucking failures in real time as the most unadulterated, truest version of who we are. No sugarcoating. Welcome to the shit show, you derelict.
Welcome back, y'all. This is Josh with the Derelict Podcast, and we have another special guest today, Alicia Farricielli. Did I get it right that time?
You got it right.
Okay. Because we had this whole conversation about how, like, my Italian heritage, and apparently her husband's Italian heritage, made me want to say Farricielli, but she pronounces it Farricielli. So here we go. We're good. Tomeoni, whatever, however you want to word that.
Yes.
So, Alicia, welcome. I'm so glad you're here.
I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. You know, this is really good timing too, and I'm going to give a little teaser to everybody watching right now. You primarily focus on inner child work, correct?
Yes, inner child work.
We connected because I was saying that a lot of men, especially in my experience, and including myself, had no idea how to do any of that work before a couple years ago. In my mid-30s, honestly, is the first time I ever learned how to even look at any inner child woundings or pain or difficulty or trauma or, whatever.
Yeah.
And I think that in general, it's really true of a lot of guys. It is, I'm sure, for women as well, but just specifically for men. And one of the reasons I'm really excited to talk to you about today, and we will talk about this later on in the episode, so stay tuned. This is a little bit of a teaser. I had a very interesting realization just today, Alicia, about some inner child stuff having to do with my last relationship that I just got out of a few months ago. So there's the teaser. We're going to talk about that a little bit later in the episode. And maybe if you're willing, maybe I'll even let you do a little inner child work on me. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see if you're up for it. All right.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear it.
Okay, good. Sounds good. So I know that you focus on inner child healing. You focus specifically with, men having just a difficult time kind of bringing up their feelings, bringing up their emotions, even being okay realizing that they have this. Is this something that you see often?
Yeah. So unfortunately in our society, and I will preface this, say that it's getting much better. Mental health has been something that's been shoved down generations by generations, and it's always been, especially with the male masculine dominant side of people, is you just move on, you suck it up, you don't face anything that happened to your emotions, and you move on to be a man. And so women are actually taught this too, to a certain, certain extent, that we have to kind of get that masculine energy going through us, and just move on with stuff. So men have historically that's just been what they've been taught generation by generation by generation for probably the past 200-300 years. And so as this is going down, men are not taught to look at what they were missing as a child. What was that little boy, that little they or whatever inside that they were missing? What were the things that they needed emotionally, mentally, sometimes even physically, that what needs are not met? And so I want to also go back to say that even if you were raised in a completely normal, quote unquote, household, you didn't have any type of, you grew up in a 2-parent household where everyone got along and you had very loving parents, there are still some things that were probably missing in your childhood. I'll call those wounds. Because as parents, and I'm a parent of older children, I completely understand this. We don't understand every single thing and every single need that a human needs, because we're still trying to take care of ourselves, especially if that parent needed inner child healing to begin with. And so they're passing the stuff down. You could grow up in a childhood that was picture perfect in your mind, but you also had the pressures of being the perfect child. And so I see this a lot, especially with older children, or the oldest child. The youngest child tends to kind of come along, but the older children, they were supposed to be perfect. They have to put on this face, and they have to have the good grades. They have to get into, scholarship. They have to get into college. They have to become doctors or lawyers. But maybe they just wanted to run around like Batman and pretend to be creative. And maybe they wanted to do other things. They wanted to be a different person. And so they're told, everybody gets told to put into this box. And so when we're put into this box, we start not listening to our intuition. We start listening to the side of us. Our creativity starts to go down. We become something that we're created or designed to become. We get put into society's box again. And so,
yeah, I just real quick, I relate to that a lot of what you're saying, because, I've kind of a mixed family. So I have some older half siblings, and then I was an only child for a long time. And then I have a younger adopted sister, that eventually came on the scene. But the majority of my life, 12 years of my life, I lived solo. Yeah. Oldest, only child, right? And I now look at my son, who's just about to turn 12, and he's the oldest of my 3 kids. And you're absolutely right as far as that oldest goes. I mean, if you're an oldest listening to this, tell us if you disagree, because I've never heard of an oldest disagreeing with us. The most responsibility, the most just weight on your shoulders of, I have to do everything perfect. I remember coming home and getting an A- and my parents freaking out, like, what's that? How could you dare get an A-? Right? There's just so much. And now, as you probably know with your kids, they don't even do grades anymore, apparently, because it's, I don't know, too harmful for somebody's, they have to come see you later for inner child work because they got a C. My God. Oh, goodness sake. But, so I relate to that a lot. And I still, as much of work as I've done, so I've been on kind of this healing journey for the past 6 years, about 6.5 years now. And as much work as I've done on it through a bunch of different mediums, I still find that popping up. I still find that popping up of like, hey, you're the oldest, you're responsible, get it done. You don't have time, especially as a man, to even think about these things, to allow yourself to have these emotions, to allow yourself to go through this grief, right? All that sort of stuff. It's just, it's conditioned. It's conditioned from my childhood. It's conditioned from society. It's all over the place.
Yeah, it is very conditioned, and it's very, men are supposed to act a certain way, and women are supposed to act a certain way. You also, as a female, men could probably relate this too. It's like, oh, well, women are so emotional. They're so emotional. Men are not so emotional. I've met more emotional men in my life than I have probably emotional women. And it's because they break down, because they can't hold it all together.
Yeah. So let's define that though. When you say emotional men, what do you mean by that?
By emotional, I'm talking by society standards of breaking down, showing your emotions.
So like visibly emotional?
Visibly emotional, almost like almost emotional breakdowns is what I would say. I'm not going to say like a traumatic breakdown, but you see it through men typically are through anger. You don't really see tears. You see the anger portion come out of it because that's what they're told to be as strong. Women break down more. I'm seeing more in like a tearful, emotional way as opposed to anger way.
Wouldn't you say that society allows or it's acceptable for men to have certain emotions and then for women to have other emotions?
Yes, exactly.
And from my experience, like it's okay if a man is angry. I mean, it's not okay now with all the toxic masculinity bullshit happening in society. But it's one of the it's understandable if he gets angry because he's a man. And it's understandable if she gets sad because she's a woman. But God forbid she gets angry or he gets sad. That's not acceptable.
She turns into a witch with another word, And the man turns into just a wuss. And so the problem with all of this is we get emotions locked inside of our bodies. We get things that are locked. And so in emotions, and there's so much science going on and some proven science now going on with this, that when these emotions get locked inside our body, it starts to create disease. When we have anxiety, it's stress in our bodies. It creates diseases. It creates our heart issues, lung issues, brain, all kinds of things start to happen. Cancers start to arise because these emotions get locked inside of us because we're not processing through those, because as we're taught as that. And one way to go through that is to get back to processing what it would through your inner child. And so your inner child is, and I'll go ahead and just find that because a lot of people don't know, what is this inner child? It is that I would say that little child, that portion inside of you. So imagine yourself when you were between the ages of 3 to 7, the youngest you can imagine yourself, what you were like. You were most likely I'm talking before the society came in. Imagine yourself. You're probably like this free-spirited child. You know, maybe you wanted to be a superhero, or you love to play with cars. I'm just a man. Or maybe you like to play with dolls as a man, and you're told you weren't allowed to do that. Maybe you like to call, you're creative. You like to play ball or whatever. Imagine that playful portion of yourself. You had no boundaries to what you could do in your life. You had you could do anything. There was nothing. You were free-spirited. That's the inner child inside of you. And so again, as we go along in society, as we get older and we get things told us to us, that child goes into this little box. And these little wounds start to take place, and we're not being our authentic self. And so we can have a very wounded inner child, which there's so many people, unfortunately, walking around with a wounded inner child, or we can have a very connected, playful inner child. So it's almost like you have this little kid that's attached to you. And I call mine a little Alicia, and I'll talk to her almost on a daily basis. You call yours little Josh or whatever you want you to do. And just going inside and talking and calming that child and let it feel. Most of the time, I would say probably 90% of what's being missing is safety, to feel unconditionally loved, and to feel wanted and respected.
Have you heard of internal family systems?
Yes, I love IFS. Yes.
Okay. So that's what it sounds like to me that
Yes.
you're talking about right now. You know, maybe for the audience, could you just kind of describe that, and specifically based on how you're talking about your inner child right now? Because I think it really relates.
Yeah. So interfamily systems is where you take parts of your body. And I'm actually learning a little bit more about this. I'm not going to talk into big depth of it because I'm good to go down that clinical route. But it's the portions and parts of you. You have your protectors. You have things inside of you that try to protect you from issues and triggers that happen. And so, for instance, let's say you're driving down the road and you get a car pulled out in front. This is very small one, pulls out in front of you, and you automatically just go into this rage and you start screaming and cussing at this car that probably had no idea that it pulled out in front of you to begin with. They weren't paying attention. And so we're projecting all this anger and all this stuff onto this car. And that's triggered us. So therefore, our bodies are just in this rageful spot. That's not emotionally good for you. That's not physically good for you. And so, and if you take on a kind of an IFS, interfamily systems model, you would go through and talk to that part. A lot of times when I'm doing work with some clients, that I do a little bit, very minor work with it, is we'll name the part. Like, where are you feeling it in your body? Is it in your shoulders? We'll have that part talk to you. And so you can do that with your inner child as a kind of a whole, and go back and talk to the inner child. Well, what is it that made you feel unwanted? Well, is it because a kid called you ugly in school when you were in 2nd grade? Then you have to go back and go, was that true? No, because everyone is beautiful in their own ways. Ugliness is something that's defined by a person-to-person society thing. So when you start to understand that, maybe your teacher called you, said, again, you went back, you got an A-. Maybe you thought you were stupid at that point. And so you've carried this emotion and this thought process subconsciously in your brain going forward that I'm not good enough because I didn't get that A+. And I'm never going to be good enough until I get an A+. But when I get that A+, it's still never enough. So I have to keep achieving and achieving and achieving and achieving and achieving. And it never ends. That's where you go back to your inner child to be like, you know what? You did a terrific, amazing job as getting that A-. I'm really proud of you for that A- because, you worked hard. You did great. And an A- is a great grade. And even if you got an F, it's still a good, because you actually are a smart person. Now look where you are in your life. You have a podcast now. You have all this stuff going. And even if you're working at McDonald's or Burger King, you have a job. Go back and see all the accomplishments that you have. And you're basically debunking the myth that the A- made you unworthy. Now, this is not an overnight thing. It's a constant looking yourself and learning the self-love and compassion, and telling that inner child, because the inner child's probably still going around thinking, I'm dumb, I'm stupid, I'm unworthy because I got the A-. I'm just using this as an example. I don't know if it's necessarily
I think it's a great example. And here's the reason why, is because when I first learned about some of this work, and specifically through IFS, I have an inner child and I've named him. And sure, this will be the first episode I will say this. So
I love it.
We're all in a special place right now. His name is Casper.
Okay.
And the reason his name is Casper is because he's a scared little ghost, just like the ghost,
Yeah.
right? So every time I know my inner child is scared, insecure, etc., then I try to talk to Casper. And for anyone listening that hasn't experienced this before, go research some more stuff on IFS. I'll maybe even include something in the show notes as well, because it sounds really woo-woo, and it sounded really woo-woo when I started doing it. But here's the one thing that I did realize, and that is I didn't realize how much of my time and energy went towards fighting my inner child.
Mm-hmm.
And basically telling him he was wrong, or shaming him, like, you shouldn't feel that way, or it doesn't make any sense that you'd be sad right now, or, well, just, pick yourself up by your bootstraps and try again, right? Like as my grandpa used to say.
Right.
Or just whatever it is, like I was never really accepting of him, because it made me feel weak to do that. Because if this is a part of me and this little kid is weak, then that means I'm weak. Now, the interesting thing I think about that I've really resonated with the last several years, especially with 3 kids, is that I don't do that with my own kids, right? I don't just yell at them and be like, hey, man up, get better. You know what I mean? Like, I don't yell at my 7-year-old daughter and just say, hey, you're being, a dork and you shouldn't be feeling anything ever. And I'm going to shame you and that sort of thing. But I do it to myself.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up, because we do that. We talk to ourselves worse than we would ever anyone else. And so when you're doing the work, good, that's such a great point. To go back and how would you talk to if I'm going to assume that most of your listeners are great parents and loving and kind, and they're not abusive parents. We'll put that out there.
Yeah, if they have kids. There's plenty of people that don't have kids.
And if you don't, think about your nieces or nephews or your best friend's child, or just think of a child. They just walked down the street. Would you talk to this child this way? Would you criticize a child that you still continue to criticize? Why would you? We treat other people so much better than we treat ourselves. And we have to stop that. I mean, we have to start authentically loving ourselves, not.
Yeah. One way I actually thought about doing it as well that helped me, Alicia, when even I think before I was at a point where I really did love myself, is that I would think about Casper as an example, as one of my children, because just tweaking that in my mind, I'm like, well, I'm going to be nicer to them. I'm going to be more generous with them. I'm going to be kinder with them. I'm going to be more loving to them. I'm going to be more accepting and empathetic and everything else. And I know when I have a hard time with my own insecurities, limiting beliefs, etc., that's what I try to remind myself, is like, if I'm being mean to myself, I'm like, you wouldn't do this to your kids. So talk to yourself like you talk to your kids. Be a father to yourself, right?
Yeah. That's the coolest thing, is you can go back and reparent yourself. Even if you if you had the most horrific childhood, you can go back and rewrite that in your own entire mind and reparent yourself and heal from that. You don't have to accept that as what's happened to you. That's your identity. Because I feel like so many people are walking around this world with their identities tied to their traumas, tied to their wounds, tied to things that are going on. That is absolutely not who you are. That is something that happened to you, not justifying what happened, but it's something that happened to you, but that is not you.
Yeah, and let's actually talk about that for a second, because I was having this conversation with someone the other day as well, and I think it's really important. We as humans like to label things. We like to put things in boxes, right? We like to categorize things. That's why people say, hey, I am a lawyer, I am a Democrat, I am a Republican, I am a doctor, I am, whatever, right? We all love to I'm a father. We love to label things. However, when labeling things, that identifies us. And if I walk around, take an alcoholic, another good example. If I walk around all day long and say I am an alcoholic, the only thing my body and brain and mind and spirit remembers and lives out is that identity.
Yeah.
So is that healthy? Because if I'm an alcoholic because I'm trying to stop drinking alcohol, I should probably stop calling myself an alcoholic all the time if I want to get off of that mindset, right?
Yeah, you could reframe that. And that's one thing I'm glad you read. That's one thing I personally, and I'm not criticizing anybody's recovery programs or anything, I have an issue with saying I am an alcoholic, or people saying I'm an alcoholic, because that is not who you are. You say your soul is this. When we're brought into this world, we are just pure being. We're souls. That is who we are. Our problems, our issues, the things that we gravitate towards, the diseases, and I think alcoholism is a disease, are not who you are. If you're a cancer survivor, you are not the cancer survivor. You survived cancer. That does not, you survived alcoholism. You survived, multiple things. You survived depression. You survived motherhood, I used to identify myself as I was a single mom for many years, and that's who I was. I'm a single mom, or I was trying my job, an entrepreneur, or I'm a sales, I'm this, that. And then so when my daughter, the youngest, grew up and out, I literally had to go through therapy because I'm like, I have no identity anymore because I was a single mom.
Right. Because that's all you think about, right? When you're thinking about that, it's just, if you label that to yourself all the time, that's where you are. So now when you're not a single mom, what are you?
I am me. I am a soul, a being. I am pure love. I'm pure light. I'm pure being. I am a being who reflects love and light. That's who I am. Those are my characteristics of who I am, my personality of my soul. I'm kind. I'm resilient. That's who I am. I'm a mother, but I am a mother, but as not my identity. My identity goes within the characteristics of who I decide I want to be.
Yeah. I love what you said earlier too, just on the whole alcoholic example about, like I am recovering from alcoholism, or I'm a recovering addict, or however you want to word that. Yeah. Something positive that's showing like I'm in the healing process, I think is way more helpful, like whether people are religious or not. One phrase that I think is extremely interesting comes from the Old Testament or the Jewish Bible, and it's I am who I am. God says it.
Yeah.
And frankly, I've thought about that a lot over the years. And I'm like, well, that describes me too, right? Like I am who I am. You are who you are. That's who you are. How could I possibly try to find 1 or 2 or even 5 or 10 words that describe who I am? That doesn't describe my entire being.
Yeah.
And I do it all the time. We always do it. It's the same, like, America is probably maybe one of the worst countries for this of all the countries I've visited. But every time you go somewhere, it's like, what do you do? Right? It's never who are you, or like I am whatever. It's always like, what do you do? And that's how we want to define ourselves. So if I walk in and say, I am in finance. Oh, okay, great. Now I have my box of you in finance. But that doesn't describe who I am. That's not who I am. That's just what I do for a living, but that's not who I am. Those are 2 totally different things. Where do you think do you think your inner child gets confused by that?
Absolutely, because your inner child's been labeled. As a child, and you came into this world, you didn't have any labels on yourself. You think about it, like really think about it. If you need to go back, people need to go back and study children. Go study a 3-year-old or study a 2-year-old. They have no labels on themselves. They may think they're Batman for a minute or Superwoman, but they don't say I'm Batman or that's who I am. They don't take that full identity on as we're taking on our job roles. The next minute there's something else.
So you're bringing up a really good point right now too, and let's get a little controversial for a second. This is live in a world where people can label themselves whatever they want, right? Like I could label myself as a man or a woman or a cat or a dog or Superman or whatever. And so can kids. And I was having this conversation with a buddy of mine the other day because his daughter was saying, well, I'm a witch.
Okay.
And he comes from a very religious conservative background to where that triggered him.
Yeah.
Where he's like, oh no, blah. And then he realized he had to get out of that moment for a second and get out of his own insecurity. And then he had to, because where his mind went was like his ex-wife, her mom is now practicing witchcraft or thinking about practicing witchcraft or something in that field. And he's like all nervous about it. So all of these things are happening, right?
Yeah.
And then he just paused himself. He collected himself. And then he said, well, what does that mean to you? Just to clarify. And you know what he found out afterwards? It was just a make-believe thing like every other make-believe thing the kids want to do. It's like what are they called? Like the Furbies or whatever, the kids that like are animals at school or whatever now, right? Yeah. It's like I see my kids, because of their imagination, pretend they're things all the time. It doesn't mean that the kid actually thinks it's a cat. It means it wants to pretend to be a cat because it thinks cats are interesting.
Yeah.
And then we lose that as adults. And then we put on children, I think, like, oh, well, if they say that they're a cat, they actually believe they're a cat. No, they don't. They're just using their imagination.
They don't even know what they are.
No, absolutely. And then we as adults were like, well, that couldn't just be imagination. I remember I heard, I can't remember who this was. It was one of the stand-up comedians, and they were talking about how like we could never make all this stuff up in the adult mind. And his response to that was, have you ever seen Star Wars? Right? Like we make up imaginative, creative things all the time as humans. So why are we so insistent on labeling these things and not just allowing imagination to flow? To me, and this is coming to a question, it's kind of a rant that's coming to a question. But my question is, I just wonder, even for myself with my own inner child, do I squash that creativity so much that then when I label myself as something, it actually maybe makes my inner child more insecure?
So a lot of times we have so much fear going on and we have so much control. And so when our inner child feels out of control and it feels like it is not able to be authentically who they are, and if it's a cat, a dog, a mouse, or a human being, whatever that the inner child feels it needs to be at that moment, and it's creative imagination, and we have squashed that down, that's where a lot of control issues come in. You find some people who have the most control, they're controlling over every single thing in their life, and anything goes out of whack, they just freak out. Their inner child doesn't feel like it's in control. And so we have to make that inner child feel like it's in control. And by doing that is maybe by letting yourself out, walk around and imagining you're a cat or a dog or whatever you want to be. And you can do this in the privacy of your home. And it may sound crazy insane, but bear with me. If it's coloring out a cat or drawing something out, and I'm just using a cat as an example, maybe your inner child just needs to connect to that. Maybe it finds characteristics of a cat that it admires. Maybe it's things that it's looking at something that a cat can make. Maybe the cat makes it feel like it's loved and are like respected all the time, unconditionally loved, because pets do that. And so maybe the child is seeing something out of that and like, well, I want to be like that. I want that in my life. So typically when children are acting out doing things, it's because they need something, they're needing something in return. Children don't act out just to act out because they're kids. They act out for a reason, because they're missing something. A need is not being met. And so once that need is met, and the same thing goes through adulthood. So if your inner child, if you're finding yourself angry about a lot of things, or you find yourself, you have to control every little portion of your life. You have to control yourself in relationships. You have to control your job. If you're an overbearing parent, you have to control. You are consistently worried about it. I was consistently worried about my daughter when she was a teenager. I would get up at night anxiety. It would make her come home at 10 o'clock when she was 17, 18 years old, because I had to have that control, because I felt something, because my inner child she's much grown now, but my inner child was like screaming at me that something bad's going to happen, because I didn't have that control. So once we make our inner children feel like they're in control and loved, and they want to feel safe, because that's basically what you get when you feel out of control. You're going back to that safety. You need to feel safe, and where safety comes from love, feeling unconditionally loved.
Yeah, absolutely. That's good. That was really good. So I was going to ask you a different question, but you just brought up a different question now in my mind. And that is there anything that I know we're not really talking about parenting here, but I kind of want to just talk about it briefly. Is there anything that we can do with our kids that keeps that inner child healthy, I guess is my question.
So I feel like there's a fine line, because children are children. They don't always know the best physical, emotional things for themselves. However, I'm going to go back to the example maybe of your friend, the daughter, I'm assuming it's the daughter that said she was a witch now. Let
Right.
them play that out. This comes back from my background too, of having forced belief systems, forced stuff, because children are going to find their own belief systems, and you want them to authentically find those. If you want them to authentically find your same belief system, teach them in a unjudgmental, open-minded situation, and let them think for themselves. Let them come to those conclusions themselves. That's the best thing I think you can do for children. Let them be kids. Let them play. And it's really hard today, because I know in school systems, it's like they're shoving so much information down. It's like so rigid, and there's like no control system. And so when you're getting to school age children, that can be a little more difficult. But at home, Lucy, what's the worst thing that's going to happen if they don't make an A? And I'm not saying not to put enough, that you should be teaching some making an A, doing the best that they can do. What is the best that you can do? What grade would make you feel better about it? Was it an F? Well, why would that make you feel good about it? Because it's easy? Well, why does that make you feel good about being easy? Well, here's kind of why it's probably not the best idea to start striving for the easy, because life is harder. And once you start going through the hard stuff, and teaching them at a young age that doing hard things, letting them do hard things, letting them make those mistakes. Because when they get into adulthood, they're going to know how to handle those situations.
Yeah, I like a lot of what you just said, and I want to just comment on a couple things. Number one, right? There's range of parents, right? There's the parents over here that let their kids do everything and just run amok, and it's like children of the corn, right? And then there's parents over here that are so strict and rigid that there's a rule for everything, right?
Yeah.
And most people are somewhere in between, right?
Yeah,
and
right.
Maybe lean towards one side or the other. But what I really like what you said about both of those is I think of it like sheep. And here's what I mean by that. Sheep need fences somewhere. Otherwise, they'll just wander forever. And if you don't believe me, go to Iceland. They're all over the island. There's 4 to 1 sheep to people in Iceland. They're everywhere. Okay? Because they don't know what to do. They don't know where to go. They don't know how to, and they die all the time because there's too much freedom. Too much freedom is a bad thing.
Right.
But then if you constrain them like this, that's really unhealthy for them as well, right? So they need to have some sort of border, but then also freedom within that. And I think of that often with my kids, is like I want them to be able to, like you said, have that freedom to explore and be creative and try to figure out who they are, etc. But I still want to give them some borders and some guidance and some morals and some, those sort of things, right? And it seems like that is a good way of doing it. And I'm just going to, again, make another maybe unpopular comment right now because I think it's important. I think there's a huge danger right now. And if anyone's not paying attention to this, you need to pay attention to it because it is a huge danger. I think there's a huge danger right now with how much propaganda schools are shoving into our children's heads and trying to have them be exactly the way they want them to be. There's all this talk of like, well, you shouldn't be talking religion in schools and all that sort of stuff. School is religion right now. They have their own religion. They do.
It is very true.
It might not be like a traditional like Jewish or Christian or Islamic religion or something like that, but it's religion. They're very, very hardcore about their propaganda and everything else. So I've had friends in the past that have just like, well, I'll just let my kids figure it out. Your kids can't figure it out. Your 7-year-old does not know how to figure it out. You can let them be creative and open and explore and figure their stuff out, but still they have to have some guide rails. And I do too. I have to have guide rails also. Like if I don't have guide rails, especially with what I do with, businesses I have and flexibility and freedom, if I don't have guide rails, I just sit around and do nothing because I'm lazy at the end of the day.
We have a bunch of these kids.
Too.
These kids walking around like this all day long.
Yeah.
Get this out of their face. I will say that 100,000 times, and I'm not criticizing. Cell phones are fine, kids. Limit this because this right here is creating a bunch of what do you call NPCs? What the word terminology is like? What those players walking around? Nobody is critically thinking for themselves. The best thing you can do for your child is to teach them how to critically think. Don't shove one doctrine or one statement or one thing down their throats and tell them that's the only way. And again, don't let them be out wild. Give them the stuff too. Yeah.
Absolutely. Going back to my buddy with the daughter, the witch, right? Like, yeah. There's a couple things I liked about what I heard that he said. Number one is he kind of let her explore it a little bit. He didn't just shut it down, even though his own defensiveness and insecurity wanted to, right? And then the other thing is he talked to her about it. He asked questions. He had a conversation with her. Like, what does that even mean to you? And he found out that what it meant to her was completely different than what he was being insecure and defensive about because it didn't mean to her the same thing it meant to him.
Yeah. We find that so often. We're so polarized now, and we're conditioned in society. We are conditioned. If you are not, again, probably one of those conversations that people are like, no. If you don't realize how conditioned we are and to everything that's going around here and how polarized we are, and that's conditioning, then wake up. Like there's so much waking up that needs to happen. So much, again, critical thinking coming along, like your friend did. Ask questions to your children. Ask these questions. Ask the hard questions to them. Children are not scared to answer these questions if they don't have a reason to be scared.
Yeah,
that's how you're going to keep this inner child within them, less wounded. Again, there's still going to be probably some wounds because they're in society, and parents may not have done it, maybe teachers or whatever. But in order to keep some of those wounds where they can critically think to know how to overcome things, it's so crucial. And I'm seeing a generation of intelligent, and these kids that are under like I'm talking 30 under. I call them kids are 30 under. They're so intelligent. They are, I mean, especially in the younger generations, the 10 to, they're so intelligent, but they're being dumbed down purposely. The critical thinking is taking out because it's power and control that corporations, businesses, politicians, schools, all the thing can have. How do you control people? You take away their critical thinking.
Well, and let's not forget why the school system in America specifically was born the way that it was. It was to build people to go into manufacturing jobs that sat at a plant and did this all day long.
Right.
And is that even the world we live? Like, who does that? I mean, there's robots that do that, right? There's no humans are needed for any of that. And the very small amount of industries that are still barely hanging on by a thread, robots will take over in the next 5 years, probably anyway.
Yeah.
So what is so the entire school system is completely fucked as far as trying to teach any kids what might actually be meaningful to them whatsoever. I can't tell you, I would say the majority of the most successful people I know have the least amount of education, as in the traditional sense. Most of them didn't go to college. The ones that did dropped out. You look at any of the billionaires, most of them didn't go to college. And if they did, they dropped out. There's a reason for that, because all of that schooling, and this is coming from a guy who went to college and other stuff afterwards, etc. So I have a lot of education myself, but I will tell you that what's helped me more is just learning how to live life. It hasn't been education. So let's go back to this, unless you have a comment on that before I move on.
Oh, I don't know. I totally agree with you.
So let's go back to Casper for a second. Okay, so for the entire audience, by the way, if you've made it this far and you're hearing about Casper, I want you to do one of two things. Either go down to the show notes and shoot me an email. It's in there, just with the word Casper, and I will send you something for free, and it will be worth your while. Or go down to the comments on YouTube and write Casper, and I will send you something for free. Okay, there you go. So Casper, this is the realization I had today. So we're going to come back to this, this tease that I gave at the beginning of the episode. So I'm trying to figure out how to do this without throwing anyone under the bus. So give me a second. So in the not too distant future, I got out of a relationship, and I had this realization today about this relationship that I think has to do with my inner child. And I'm curious if there's some inner child work or healing that you think needs to be done here. So let me back up for a second. Growing up, I was surrounded by several people that were either full on bipolar or had bipolar tendencies. So real quick, just in my very non-medical way of describing that to the audience right now, bipolar used to be called manic depressive, which I like better, frankly, because it's a better definition of what it is, where somebody's either manic, right? They're up here, they're crazy, or they're depressive. They're down here, they're having depression. Manic depressive. Bipolar is the same thing. It's just one or the other. You're not really in the middle ever. You're just manic or you're depressive. And for a lot of people, they get on medication to try to, kind of even them out, be right here. So I was around a lot of that growing up. And I think because I was around a lot of that growing up, I was also around a lot of codependency.
Okay.
And I think that those two often, from my experience, go hand in hand. Because if somebody is manic depressive and somebody's close to them, partnered to them, married to them, etc., it's really easy, I think, to fall into codependency. Because if codependency is, I want you to be okay so that I'm okay. Well, if you're hanging out with a manic depressive person, you want them to be okay and kind of stable so that you can feel stable, right? So I grew up in that environment with a lot of family and everything else. So that's the background of what I'm about to say.
Okay.
I realized just today, it was just kind of a random thought that popped into my mind when I was watching another podcast, actually. And I realized that this relationship that I was in, this person showed a lot of manic depressive type qualities. I don't think necessarily they're bipolar. I don't really know. I don't know if I think it's undiagnosed maybe, or maybe not, whatever it is. I just noticed that I saw a lot of that. And what I was thinking about is how much I appreciated this relationship and absolutely loved this person I was in relationship with. And I was thinking about how future relationships, I don't want them to be boring.
Mm-hmm.
And then it clicked with me. I was like, you don't want it to be boring because you like the chaos. Because the chaos is home for you. Because you're so used to it either being here or here or here or here, where not only has that turned out into my own life where I have a hard time being here, I'd rather be here often as well. But I realized like, oh, that's another reason I was attracted to her, because it was like this. It was fun. It was exciting. It was adventurous. It was never just boring, right? And I just wonder, since you do a lot of inner healing work with people, do you think that there's something about my, let's say Casper, my inner child, that is still too comfortable with that arrangement to where I just can't find, like relationally, as an example, I'm single now, relationally, like the worst thing in the world to me sounds like somebody that's just like even keel and boring. And for whatever reason I have in my head, I have to be like chaotic, not to be even keel and boring. Do you think that there's inner healing work that needs to happen there, or something with the inner child? What do you think?
I'm going to say absolutely. Not knowing your past, relationships, and all digging into all that. I would say I would highly suggest looking into why. So were you always feeling like you had to protect people? Were you always having to walk on eggshells around them, and the right 100%. Thing to say?
Eggshells is the word I would use. It's the word I used when I saw my therapist for however many years I saw him. We talked about it all the time.
Yeah. So your nervous system is used to that. And so you almost have to go back, and there's a couple of things I would do is definitely go back and talk to Casper and say, what was the need that were you not, what did you want to feel at that time when you were going through that with a mother, a father, aunt, whatever, whoever that was that you were dealing with? How did you want to be comforted and loved and secure? What were you missing? And then go back and see, how can I give that to myself? Second thing is work on your nervous system through breath work, meditation, doing energy, something to work, aligning your nervous system down, because your nervous system is so used to fight, flight, freeze, and you're like fight, flight, fight, flight. You're going up and down, up and down, up and down. And so your nervous system doesn't know how to regulate. So regulate that, learning to regulate, it's a process. It's not an overnight thing. So regulate that nervous system and see how you feel. I would highly suggest possibly not jumping into another relationship until you get the nervous system regulated, because normal relationships, there are their highs and their lows, but you want to stay on a medium ground. You want to stay in that because that's where you grow. You're not growing at the height or the lows. You're in survival mode. So you got to get your nervous system out of survival mode. You're still in survival mode. And so you're trying to save other people still, and I'm assuming that when it got low or got medium is when you're like, this is not great. But when it's high, because you're saving someone, or you're feeling needed. So maybe it's coming down to the fact that you didn't feel needed as a child, wanted. You only felt needed and wanted whenever you were able to prove your worthiness to it. So maybe there's a lot of things kind of going.
Yeah, no, that's all true. That's
down
all true.
To it. Yeah.
And a lot of stuff that I've worked on through therapy, frankly. Yeah. And it just never clicked with me that the relationships I was bringing on were similar to the ones that I grew up near. I mean, that sounds like such a duh statement, but it was just one of those things this morning where I was like, yeah, that's why I like the chaos, because I'm used to it. It feels like home.
Moment. That's a big moment, a big aha moment. And actually, I tell people celebrate those moments, because that's the beginning of starting to heal that process, because we don't know what we don't know until we know it. And once we realize 100%. We know it, it's like, bam, now I know what to work on.
I've we talk about failure a lot on here. We talk about struggles. I'm obviously very open and authentic. I'm sharing stuff, in front of a bunch of people right now that most people wouldn't share, I think. And the reason that I do that is because I want to encourage other people to do it as well. And I want especially men to feel like, hey, it's okay. Like, your world's not going to end if you just share something like this. But man, I've been on this intense healing journey for like 6.5 years now. And it's just every time I think I've hit there's something else, right? Like, today doesn't seem like it should have been that big of a realization after having 6 years of those realizations. But it just clicked something different in my head where it was like, it's kind of the idea. I don't want to make this all about relationships, but I have plenty of friends like this, but one friend specifically comes to mind. And pretty much every time I talk to her and ask her how dating's going and everything else, it's always like, well, why can't I just find, why aren't there any good guys out there? That whole bullshit.
Yeah.
Like, I just can't find a guy that wants this. And then she attracts these guys that are the exact opposite of what she wants. And that was kind of the realization I was thinking about today. I was like, well, I'm attracting this, right? Like I can't blame anybody else for this. And none of us can. And frankly, if you're watching this podcast and you have a little chip on your shoulder right now, go fuck yourself, because you do the same thing. You do the same thing. We all do the same thing. There's always something that we're like, oh, I know better than this person, and I know better than this, blah, blah, blah. But to your point, the real learning, the real growth I've ever had in my life is when I get smacked in the face or wherever, and I have to realize, like, that's why this is happening. How do I learn from this? How do I grow from this? How does this improve the next relationship I've had? And, you know, ever since I got divorced, every relationship I've had, especially the long-term ones, has gotten better because I've learned something from the last one.
Yeah.
And that's been replaced. And yet here I am, single still at 40, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But sometimes it feels like there's something wrong with it. But every single relationship, it just improves one thing after another, right? And you know, I guess the thing that I'm realizing too is that as much of the work as I've done on my inner child and that trauma and all that sort of stuff, it's just still surprising to me sometimes when it pops up.
Those layers, you got to, I mean, you tell anybody who says they're completely healed, I'm going to call BS on them, because you're going to have a trauma. There's so many things that happen. We're not done living. You can be completely healed when you're done living, but we're not done living. Things are going to happen. There's going to trigger other things. They're going to cause other things to trigger. So it's a continuous learning process. But as you seem to know by now, is it gets exciting because now you have this aha moment of, this is what's missing. This is exactly what I need to start working on to make my life even better. And so we don't know what we don't know until we know it. And so we have to give ourselves grace through that period too. It's like, well, I didn't know that. You didn't know this subconsciously. You had no idea this was going on. So now that you know that, you can make those changes. You know how to start that healing process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember somebody said this once, and I try to remember it. Like, anytime, I'm not perfect at this, I definitely mess up at this, but anytime I am confused or go through a failure, which, by the way, let's just define failure for a second, because everybody hates that word. All failure means is that you didn't hit the target you were shooting for. That's all failure is.
A learning opportunity.
It's not, it doesn't mean that you're a terrible person. Like, people always think of that, but look up the definition of failure. Forget the first definition of failure, lack of success. That's not helpful. Here's the second definition of failure when I Google it. The omission of expected or required action. The omission of expected or required action. So all failure means is that I omitted an action. That's it. I didn't do the action I said I was going to do. That's a failure. So we all fail all the time. Back to what I was trying to say. What I try to remember when I'm either confused or I go through a failure is I try to remember that is exciting because I'm on the edge of a breakthrough.
Yes.
Every single time.
Yes.
Because if I fail at something or I'm confused by something, there will be a breakthrough if I sit with that and just try to figure out, like this morning is a great example, where I sat with it for a second. I was like, that's what I'm bringing into my life. Interesting. Versus shaming myself of like, you should know better. You've been going through all this growth and this health, and you've been on this journey for a long time, and you're 40 years old and blah, 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 right? All the different things that I could do. It's just like you said, it's exciting, right?
It's exciting. And that goes back to our first thing is like, that's not who you are, or the things that are going through your head of I'm horrible, da, 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 da. That's your ego speaking. That is absolutely not who you are. Your spirit is the one who's excited about, wow, this is a new breakthrough. That's your spirit. That is who you are, genuinely.
Absolutely. Yeah. I agree with you. So as we, I know we're going to wrap up here pretty soon, but what sort of, if you were to, this isn't specifically just for men, feel free to speak to women as well, but we've talked about men quite a bit because of just difficulty of, well, let me put it this way. I think our society is a lot more open, and we as a culture are a lot more open to women getting healing for themselves than men in general. And I'll just say it by this sentence. And if you're a man, or if you're a woman who knows a man, which is everybody, just look at any of your social media and tell me that 90% of the guys out there trying to sell you something aren't trying to just sell you a better body. That's all it ever is. It's not mental health. It's not spiritual health. It's not usually therapy or even anything like that.
Yeah.
It's usually just, how do you get a six pack? Nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying inner child work is not going to work. You will not get to the inner child work by getting a six pack. It's just, it's just not, those are two different things, right?
Right.
So I guess my question for you is specifically to the men who maybe don't feel like they have permission to do this work, are able to do this work, they feel ashamed to do this work, or maybe they're like me where they're like, I should know better by now. You know, what do you say to them? How do they get started? How do they start doing some of this work? Obviously, they can reach out to you, and we'll put your information in the show notes as well. But how else, what could they do? What are some practical steps, do you think?
I think you need to get really real with yourself. The first thing is, where in areas in your life are you not happy? Because you wouldn't be asked those questions if you're not happy. And are you willing to continue your life the rest that way? And second of all, question to ask yourself, and that is, are you willing to do what it takes to get work? If it's taking away from your masculinity or whatever, can you feel less like a man? Are you willing to do that? Know that there are ways you can do that and still in a safe space. And then again, the third question is, what type of space would you feel safe to do the work in? But you have to get really, really honest with yourself and not sugarcoat anything. Not be like, well, I'm a man, or I knew all this stuff, or I did, this and this and this. And like, you have to get real with yourself. Very, very honest with yourself, and knowing that you're only doing this. If you're not honest with yourself, you're doing yourself and everyone else around no good. So, yeah. I
think I just think of the analogy, again, going back to the whole like six-pack abs thing, right? That, when you start working with a fitness coach, one of the very first things that you do is you take a before picture.
Yeah.
So that you can compare it to the after picture, right?
Yeah.
And maybe you take several of those pictures. What do those pictures look like when you're doing this sort of work? Like if I'm a man and I'm like, I've never really feel like I've done much of this inner child work. Like what picture, when you said get honest about yourself, what does that look like? What do I write? How do I figure that out?
Start writing, how do I feel right now, honestly? And so we're going to go down to feelings. The first thing I think you need to just get honest with yourself is to really get in touch with those feelings. How are you feeling? You may not know at this time. Just keep writing. Well, and think, do I feel angry right now? Go to the extremities and then start bringing them in. Do I feel disappointed? Okay, so I feel disappointed right now. Why am I feel disappointed about? I feel disappointed because this happened. Why is it making me feel this disappointment? Because of this. And you start digging and digging and digging layers and layers and layers and layers deep until you get to the root problem. And if you still feel like this is still not intuitively, you need go into yourself and be like, is this something that I feel like is the problem, the issue I need to work on? And you're going to know. That's, again, just going back to the honesty. Well, it's because my parent told me this and this. Okay, then you have to ask yourself, is this true? And how can I rewrite this story? And that's a lot of stuff. I mean, that's tons of steps. So going back to the six-pack abs, you're going to start off with a flabby belly. And then you're going to take your next picture and you're going to have a little smile on your face. And then the next picture, you have a little smile on your face. And then and then finally, when the layers and things start to come off, you're going to have this aura around you, and people are going to start asking you, man, Joe or whatever, Joe's like completely like changed. What has he did? What are you doing? And they're going to start asking you, why are you so happy now? What are you so happy? And if people start asking you and start getting upset, and you start seeing the polarization of people coming off of you, it's like people not wanting to hang out with you anymore, that's a good sign. You find yourself attracting new things. You find yourself, not telling you, when you start down this mental healing process, your diets will change. That's the best thing you can do for the six-pack. So I will counteract that. When you start working on yourself mentally, you're going to eat healthy. You're going to respect your body more. You're going to want to work out. You're going to want to take care of yourself.
True. It's 100% true. It's 100%. So I've been fat before, and I have an inner fat kid, is what I call him, that still just wants to eat Oreos and Doritos all the time, and Taco Bell and everything else, right? Taco Bell, I
can't anymore.
Threw up for 3 days in my mind just saying that out loud. But here's the reason I'm saying that, is I feel like maybe I'm able to say that. When my inner fat kid comes out, it's only because I have some sort of emotion I don't want to deal with. It's never because of the taste. It just isn't. Like, my brain gets programmed into, Oreos are going to make you feel better. But it's like the thing, I watch people do it with my kids too, where like they'll get upset or they start crying or something happens and they like offer them food. And I'm like, look, the biggest problem with that, like, I'm not saying that that's always wrong. Like somebody skids their knee, you get them ice cream. I'm not saying that's terrible every single time. I'm just saying if that is a consistent thing, what you're teaching that child is that every time they're hurting, they should reach for food. And now all of a sudden they're an adult that weighs 300 pounds because of the fact that they reach for that food every single time they have an insecure emotion. And yeah, sure, people, just to, cancel me right now, go ahead and say that you're big boned and you're fat because everybody else is fat. Use whatever excuse you want. You're fat because of the fact that you reach for that food, because of the fact that you feel the emotions and you don't want to feel them. I do the same thing. We all medicate on something. I've medicated on shopping and money and food and alcohol and sex and whatever, you name it.
Yeah.
When I want to do something where I don't want to feel this, or I don't want to interact with my inner child because it's too scary, it's too painful.
Yeah. And then we teach our children not to honor their emotions. We're teaching that you just shoving those emotions down. We're not teaching them how to process through those emotions. So not only are we creating a generation of children who are overweight, obese, we're also creating they're unemotionally unstable. They're not learning. And then the disease, again, it goes back to diseases start to go into your body. And so, yeah, so you're overweight or you're obese, you typically tend to have more diseases, or your body doesn't function quite like it needs to. But you also have to consider the emotional aspects of it too. So it's really, really important to learn and teach, to learn, first of all, how to process your emotions, and then tell children process their emotions, because they're children. They have so many learned behaviors from us.
Well, yeah. And I mean, there was nothing that I could do, like I said, I've been doing this healing journey for about 6 years now, but my oldest child is 12. So I haven't been doing it the entire time they've been alive. Right. And I'm telling you what, when they were smaller, there wasn't a whole lot I could do because I didn't know how to do it myself. Like if I don't know how to process my own emotions and make my own inner kid okay, which I'm still learning to do, which you just helped me with today. Thank you. I can go to the next level of that, right? So I'm not saying that, there's not constant learning. There is constant learning, but without knowing how to do any of that, how am I supposed to model that to my kids? You're right. It absolutely has to start with you.
Yeah, my children are in their 20s, and I didn't know any of this. The traumas that I tell them all the time, like, I'm so sorry. Like, I've created lots of wounds and traumas in my children because I repeated patterns from my parents that they didn't know any better. It's just repeated patterns. I was a very young mom. I was raising children in my 20s. It was chaotic, So there's a lot of things. But however, the work that I'm doing now is starting to pave a way for their on healing too, because they can see it within you, and you're breaking the generational ties. It's never too late. You could be 90 years old and start to break that. You're never too late. You're never too old to start healing. I don't care if you're 99 years old. You decide to wake up and one day and like, okay, I'm tired of living like this. Even if you have one day to live, start that journey. You're never too old.
And also, none of us know if we have more than one day to live. So who knows how long we have, right? I was just, having a conversation yesterday with a really good friend of mine who, got a cancer diagnosis a while ago and probably only has a couple years to live. Much younger and always really healthy and everything else, right? Like, you never know. You never know. One of my favorite books on masculinity ever was written by this guy that was 33 and then just died right afterwards, basically of this complete heart failure. So none of us know how long we're here, right? So I love what you said as well, is that age doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
I see this with different people that I've seen go into things like recovery from whether it's alcoholism or something else, where, they go in and they're 50 years old or they're 60 years old or they're 70 years old. And they're like, oh man, I wish I would have started this when I was 20. I was like, yeah, I get that. But you're starting it now. Like, you still have time to turn your life around and to create a better version of yourself and to create a better legacy for you and your family and everything else. And then all of a sudden, dad's doing that at 70. Son sees that, and then son's son sees that, and then all of a sudden the complete family dynamics change for generations. Is that worth it? Yeah, hell yeah.
Yeah, I've seen it in my own family. I've started the healing process. My mom started it after me, so
that's
it's
awesome.
Like starting that, and then my daughter's like started. So it's like we're breaking these generational things that, and my mom's 65 65, 66. She's in her 60s, you know, it's like, and she's still like doing lots of work like on herself. I'm like, so it's never too old you're never too old and it's never too late to start. Just start
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
I have this is going to sound like a weird statement, and some people are going to be like, what? I have one of the guys that I mentor is 65 and I'm 40.
Love it.
And the only reason why is not because I am so much wiser than him and I'm clearly not older than him. He actually asked me because of the fact of some of the experiences that I've been through are very similar to the ones he's going through. He just went through them later in life than me. So he just wanted my perspective and help as he was going through those. And honestly, it's been a very honoring and humbling experience because I often am like, I'm not worthy, you know, but it's just about sharing the experiences that I had with him as he's going through them. That's it. There's nothing special about me. I'm just able to share those experiences. So I agree with you. It's never too late for that.
Not at all.
Anyway, Alicia, it's been a true pleasure. So I'll put whatever resources you want in the show notes after here.
Perfect.
Are there any other specific resources you just want to mention to the audience real quick before we end here?
If you want to start the inner child work, on my website, there's a free inner child workshop that's completely free.
Fantastic.
And I think you put your email in there. It does that. And if you want to get a little deeper, then there you can book a 1-hour consultation on my website. It's very easy. Just go to there, book a call, and it's completely free. So we'll chat about whatever I'll give you some resources, no obligation at all.
Perfect. And again, that is in the show notes. So go check it, whether you're on Spotify or YouTube or wherever you're listening or watching this. It's in the show notes right there. So again, Alicia, thank you so much for being here. It was a real honor, and I really appreciate it. I know that our audience got a lot out of this inner child work, and I did too. So thank you.
Thank you for having me on here.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Until next time, we'll see you later, you derelict.